Ricardo, what are the odds that there is no regime change this year in Venezuela? And if not, what do you tell the World Bank and the various Washington institutions?
Well, I think that I'm not in a position to predict. We are in the attempt to make it happen. So predictions maybe are for observers. Actors should get the job done.
Now, the Inter-American Development Bank has recognized the interim government of Juan Guaido. When are you anticipating that other Washington institutions will do the same, like, for example, the World Bank, the IMF?
So the difference between the IDB and the IMF World Bank is that their shareholders are different. They have different weights. So it's not up to the World Bank or the IMF, but up to their membership that need to vote. And the issue centers around what will be the position of Western Europe. There's deep divides within Western Europe, and they like to vote as a bloc. So they have to sort that out. But in the meantime, the IMF has blocked Maduro's access to the IMF. So he hasn't not been able to withdraw funds that Venezuela has there, and those funds will be available when this usurpation period ends.
So to that point, this is obviously an economy falling deeper into economic crisis with immediate needs, right, to fix the electricity grid, access to water, without access to those IMF funds. I'd be curious to know what you think might be available. What is the process by which Venezuela can avail itself of them unless Guaido is installed?
Well, I mean, you're absolutely right. The only way to solve Venezuela's problem crisis is to end this period of usurpation of power, have Venezuela go back to the international community as one more member, and to get the support of the international community to fix the problems we can fix at home on our own, especially in the area of economic rights and property rights and freedoms and so on. But we will need this injection of foreign exchange coming from the international community to fix many problems, to buy food, buy medicine, buy seeds, buy fertilizers, buy spare parts, buy all the consumables that have not been replaced in the power sector, in the water sector. The transportation has ceased because people have cars, but they don't have spare parts, so cars don't work, buses don't work, trucks don't work. So there's a lot of fixing to be done. That will require, a different regime, and it will require international financial support, and that's what we're working on.
And of course, working with a plan at the ready, I imagine. Part of getting a rescue package will be coming to terms with bondholders. In terms of negotiations there, what are you willing to offer? We've seen 85 cents on the dollar kicked around. What are the kinds of deals you think need to be made here?
I think that's not in the critical path. What the bondholders want to know is that there's a new government that makes sense, that government is doing the right things to recover the country's capacity, that government is using the resources not to pay them, but to recover the country. And as a consequence, there will be a future for that country. And what the IMF will want to see is that we are having good faith discussions as to what would the outlines of a renegotiation be. But that's many months down the road. Everybody understands that the priority right now is to face the humanitarian crisis, to start recovering the economy, and to put the rest of the package together.
And obviously everybody is concentrating on the humanitarian crisis ongoing. Nevertheless, earlier this year, you said that it would take years to service the debt. What do you expect from bondholder talks? Is there something that you can say to them in negotiations that will beef up confidence that Venezuela will one day be able to repay?
I think it's not what we say, it's what we do. Oil production now is less than a third of what it was when Chavez got into power. We still have the largest oil reserves in the world. Are we changing the legal framework? Are we changing the hydrocarbons law? Are we changing the economic situation so that you can see a recovery of oil output? Are we attracting the investments? Are we making the country investable so that other people are willing to put the money into the country so that the economy can recover? Those are the critical things that we need to make sure happen, so that there is something to discuss about the servicing of the old debt.
The World Bank is expecting economic contraction of 25% this year. Now that is much larger than the 8.4% it was looking for back in October. That's pretty concerning. How much do you need and want from the IMF, and is there anything that will impede getting that?
I think that the IMF understands the magnitude of the problem. The IMF understands the magnitudes of the things involved. The IMF does not formally recognize the Guaido regime, so we haven't had formal negotiations. But I think that there's ample understanding at the IMF, at the World Bank, but also at the capitals of the major shareholders, that this is a very, very big problem, and it will require very, very significant support.
What kind of support would you like to see or expect to see from the U.S. Treasury as part of any package?
Well, the U.S. is, I think, canvassing all the agencies to find out what can be done in many areas, and they've come up with very interesting ideas on ways in which they can support the recovery of Venezuela. It's not just the money, the money is, that's why you have IMF-type organizations and so on. They can add to that program, but it's also technical assistance, the mobilization of the business sector of the U.S., engaging them in the Venezuelan recovery. Right. U.S. companies are important in oil, in power, in oil services, and in so many areas, in banking, etc., in technology, that the U.S. should see a potential upside to the U.S. economy of a recovery in Venezuela.
You've made it clear, though, that political stability has to happen before any of these things. The IMF would, I think, be similarly clear. What needs to happen, sir, at this point to get there? Do we need to hear more from the Chinese? Do we need to hear more from Europe? Who needs to speak or act to make this clear?
Well, I think the Europeans have been quite clear. Formally, they recognize Guaido as president, and they have accepted the diplomatic envoys from President Guaido. The Chinese have played a less clear role. They're a bit on the fence. They should understand that they have no future with Maduro, and that if Venezuela returns to a more prosperous path, that there are plenty of opportunities going forward, and they should start looking ahead and not look back.